Welcome to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo live Friday afternoon, Miami week. Squish the fish. It's cold. There's a little bit of snow on the ground here. It's on, right, Don?
Feels it. Yep. We're ready here. We got to be ready. In the NFL, there's a mantra. They will kick that ball off Sunday at 1 or whatever. Where the game is like
8:20, 8:25. Yeah, they're going to kick it off whether you're ready or not.
Yeah, the 1 is by default, but obviously the game was flexed for obvious reasons.
Right.
It's redundant.
So we figured we would go live here. We're going to be joined by Christine Lisi from ESPN Radio. She's actually on the air in Bristol now. She's going to join us on one of her breaks in about 15 minutes. Before that, interacting with some people on Twitter and just talking about, a bunch of people have posted clips and of old games, old memories, old rivalries that we're going to get into here. You got to start the show off here. You got to tell the Gardner story again from 1995. His interaction with Brian Cox, what happened late in the game, and then what happened after the game.
I will. Yeah. I first have to give you credit thinking about leading up to Miami, and that is that way back at the beginning of the season, losing to the Jets, Miami was red hot. They're putting up 70 points and could have done more. And the Bills started to stumble. But you said way early that the Bills will be playing in Miami. They would end up staying one game behind to have this be for the division. You went further to say that the Bills are going to play in Miami, which actually, if they win, that wouldn't happen.
Right.
But this exact scenario you pointed out is happening here in week 17 or 18. Yeah. Well done. But the 95 game was just like this. It was even maybe bigger, but these games are starting to get the same kind of feel. But playoff game and or it was for the playoffs. They played twice in a row. You played the last game of the season, and then the way it worked out, the Bills hosted Miami again. Almost a carbon copy, but Brian Cox was clearly the villain. He would come out, both guns blazing. He was spitting. He was getting into it with Thurman Thomas.
And this had been built up from a few years.
Oh, absolutely.
The hatred was real at that point, right?
Oh,
did the players hate the Dolphins players?
Yeah. It was there. They weren't afraid to admit it. Normally there's a little more diplomacy.
Sure.
But they weren't afraid to admit that they just hated the Dolphins. It was kind of there's rivalries in pro sports where it's been like that. Celtics, Sixers.
Was the Bills-Dolphins rivalry then more heated than the Bills-Patriots was in the 2010s for you?
It was because, the Patriots just dominated for all those years. I mean, but the Bills-Dolphins, they both had a lot at stake, whether it was Marino Shula versus, Marvin and Kelly and all the cast of characters. And the game, one team was going to get left behind, and they were pretty even, although the Bills really dominated. I think it was like 17.
There was a dynamic there where when it counted.
Yep,
the Bills always beat them.
They came through. So
the Bills always beat them.
Yep. So this current team has done very well against Miami when it counts.
Sure,
losing there early but
so 95.
The
fight happens on the field.
And this time it was Gardner, the fullback who was the starting fullback at that point, in like his fourth year, that got into it. I think Gardner either paved the way for Thurman Thomas to get a first down that iced the game, or he might have even carried it himself.
Yep, you're right.
It was kind of a mundane play, but it was enough that the Bills could kneel it out for the rest of the game. And Brian Cox and Gardner got into it face to face. The fans erupted. But the funniest part about it was I think they both got ejected, and they probably should have gotten ejected. And of course, that walk down the tunnel for Brian Cox was,
it's the only stadium in the NFL now, and I think even back then it's rare because both teams go through the same tunnel to the locker room, which makes it obviously even more contentious.
They're gonna merge together in like a stream, and so the contentiousness continues, and that's a great setup by you, because what I learned years later about what happened that day was something when I handled workers' comp, the union and the agents and everything, we'd have to provide all the medical records to send to a player. And part of the medical records was also their personnel file. And when I would set up the personnel file to send, I would naturally read it.
Sure.
Sometimes if something caught my eye, and I read a report about that day of that game in Carwell Gardner's personnel file that it was a fine. He was fined by the league because they found out that both teams, I guess, went to the locker room, did their thing, as you know, you've been part of that. But then afterwards, Carwell Gardner was not done. He proceeded to run out of the locker room. I don't know what he was wearing, whether he had showered. I don't know any of that. But what I do know is reading the report, he went on to one of the Dolphins buses.
Where are the visiting team buses? When the game's over,
in that tunnel area parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
Up. Yeah, I think sometimes they have like one of them is kind of like in the tunnel a little bit, but the other four are out there. Story. And I don't know if he knew which bus Brian Cox was supposed to be on, but he went on the bus seeking out Brian Cox to continue the fight.
Now, did he get fined for entering the bus?
I think so. I think he got fined for what happened on the field.
Sure.
And the fight, and he got kicked out. Anytime there's an ejection, it's followed up with a fine.
Sure.
But I can't remember. He had to have, right? But all I remember and the player, Carwell Gardner, proceeded to go on to the team bus to continue.
Was there a recap? Do you know what happened on the bus?
No, I wish I did.
And how long after this incident happened did you read that report?
Oh, shoot. A good 20 years.
That's amazing. Did you share that with anybody else?
Absolutely.
Did anybody else know it? Like did Jim Overdorf? Like did Scott Burstall? Did any of those guys ever know that?
I don't think they did. They were just as surprised and entertained by the whole thing as I was. Yeah, I'm like, holy cow! Look what I just found. And I remember, like, I put it in front of Jim, and I remember he was like, "Oh my!" I think he called somebody. Oh, you got to see this.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, that could have gotten really ugly.
Oh yeah,
like if you're
criminally maybe.
Where was the Dolphins security staff there? Right? Like how?
Well,
I guess it's
there's only
chaos.
So many. There's only a few.
Right.
But the Bills security too. I mean, maybe he disguised. I wish I could see it somehow. Somehow. Like he kind of walk. You just picture this possible scenario. He comes out being cool, walking out of the locker room, maybe whistling, "Hey, we won!" Sure. Yay! All of a sudden, he sees the bus, and like he just makes a beeline for it and goes on there.
After the game, the tunnel is a very lively. It's not just players and coaches and staff. It's medical. It's trainers. Yeah. It's
it was cheerleaders.
Sure, the band.
It was photographers. The band. Yeah.
So I guess I could see how Carwell could kind of incognito just sneak onto the Miami. And how many? Usually, what were there? 3 or 4 buses leaving.
It was 5 when I traveled, but we had a big.
So I wonder if he knew that was the bus Brian Cox was on, or was he specifically challenging Brian Cox, or was it any Dolphin?
See, there's so many scenarios. He might have seen. He might have just guessed and hoped that he was,
he might have
25% chance, or he might have seen Brian Cox. How premeditated was it? I don't know. Like he in the locker room chomping at the bit to be like, I'm going to get on that bus, or it's just when he saw the bus, he's like spontaneously got furious again and ran on the bus. I don't know.
Absolutely amazing story. and we've talked about Carwell. Yeah. Carwell was there before I was there. I found him to be the most infuriating Bill of my fandom. You've mentioned that he was, really gregarious and boisterous. But when you think of the Bills-Dolphins rivalry, most people think of, Jim Kelly, Dan Marino, Jim Jensen for older people, Mark Duper, Mark Clayton. Now it's Tua Tagovailoa and Josh Allen. I think of Carwell Gardner and Brian Cox. That to me is everything that you need to say about Bills-Dolphins. What do you think when you hear Bills-Dolphins? You were with the organization 30 years, director of football administration from 2003 until 2017. When I say Bills-Dolphins, like what comes to mind?
Well, it's the games that had playoff implications, but I go back to, Marv and Jim and Shula and Marino, and I smile because we got the best of them so many times when it counted, but the hatred was real. And so it's good to see this. It's good to see this generation of Bills fans have a taste of this.
Do you did like the Dolphins that were the Dan Marino, the Mark Clayton, the Mark Duper, those old school Dolphins? Did the Bills of the 90s respect those guys? Obviously Brian Cox, they hated. There was Don Shula. A lot of those guys were gentlemanly. They were classy people, I would say.
Sure. They would have risen above.
Sure. But did you ever?
Jimmy Johnson came though. He didn't.
Right. Did you get the sense that most of the guys in the 90s, was there a healthy respect for the Dolphins, or was it just pure hate?
Well, I think both could be true. I mean, they hated them, but they, respected the fact that here we go again. They're 9-6, and we're 9-6,
sure,
or they're 10 and whatever, and here we go again. And I think what makes me smile about it is that I remember the 4 Super Bowls were my first 4 full-time years there, and it was just the night before thinking, oh, I can't imagine, I can't stomach the thought of what it would be like to lose these games, and we did, and at least the 2, 3, and 4 were as horrible as you could envision them. And I remember thinking the same thing the night before those big games for the Dolphins, but fortunately I didn't have to experience a loss. It's like,
right.
I was like, oh, I can't even imagine what, and we didn't. We won, so many of those games.
Did the organization always feel like you were going to beat the Dolphins? Like when push comes to shove, hey, we got these guys, because I'm sure like the Patriots, we got these guys. Like we're going to always beat the Bills. Is that what it felt like?
No, I mean, in retrospect, you could easily say, well, we did it, but it really did feel like, I mean, Marino was a Hall of Fame quarterback, and the Dolphins always had those kind of role players that, they had star receivers. Somehow the running backs were always just good enough, the Bernie Parmalees and guys
Kareem
like that.
Abdul-Jabbar.
Oh yeah, right. Good call. But no, I mean, I would love to hear what Steve Tasker or General Talley would say about that. But personally, I always thought this is going to be a battle. This is going to be a war. And
what was it like? Christine Lisi is going to be joining us here. What was it like?
Oh, let's
planning to go to Miami. Christine, are you here with us?
I am, guys. Hi.
Hi, how are you? Are you in the ESPN World Headquarter bunker in Bristol, Connecticut?
I'm actually off today. I'm home because I have to work tomorrow morning. So my boss kind of swapped it out. So I would get it like another day off.
That's beautiful. Right. You do not have to work Sunday night at 8:25, right?
No, I'm off Sunday. So thank God for that.
Well, we're really pleased.
Grand Ole Opry on or something?
Yeah, something like that. We're really pleased to be joined by ESPN's Christine Lisi. She was kind enough last year to join us and tell her hometown journey from Olean, New York, to ESPN. And she's going to join us just for a bit today to kind of give us the national perspective on, Bills-Dolphins, what it's like, maybe at ESPN. I saw that you might have been on with Dan Le Batard or Stu Gatz and got that Miami stink on you, Christine.
I was on Stu Gatz's God Bless Football podcast yesterday. Yep.
Are they in full panic mode down there?
I don't know if they're in full panic mode. It's hard to tell because it was Billy Gill is the Dolphins fan, and Mike A, who's on the show, is a Jets fan. Mike Golick Sr., he's kind of, I would say Philadelphia, but not too much. He kind of keeps it close to the vest. And then Stu's a Jets fan too. So
okay, so Dan is really is he the only Miami fan of that whole crew?
I think Dan is, Roy is, I think Greg Cody and his son Chris. I think of the big show, most of them are Dolphins fans, but I was just on the podcast with those 4 guys yesterday. So it's a little bit different crew for that.
Gotcha.
He was a beat writer for Dan Le Batard for the Miami
Herald.
Yeah, for years, right?
He's probably the most well-known, organic Miami guy. So Christine, when you came on last year, you kind of gave us the lay of the land at ESPN that most of the people there were, Patriots fans, Eagles fans, Jets fans. Can you remind people, are there any other Bills fans there other than you? I know you carry the flag famously, of course, Chris Berman. Anybody else up there on the right side of history?
I want to say, Kevin Connors is one of our Sports Center TV anchors, and he does a lot of other stuff too, studio for baseball, basketball. Phil Sapaglia, the show killer. I don't know if you guys remember Phil. Yes. He's from South Buffalo. He works with me in radio. Amanda Gifford, one of our big bosses. She's from the Rochester area, east of Rochester. So she and her family are Bills fans. So there's not a lot of us. Although it was funny. A couple weeks ago, I was walking across the parking lot, and I have because I'm a child, I have a Bills lunch bag, and somebody saw it, and I don't know who it was. He's like, "Go Bills!" And I just raised my hand, and I was like, "Go Bills!" I don't even know who it was, but it was very funny.
What's the national narrative right now? From your perspective on the team, last year they were kind of everybody's darling after 13 seconds. And then of course the whole DeMar Hamlin situation, and it felt like America was kind of all rooting for the Bills. And then we all know how last season ended. It felt like everybody kind of got tired of the Bills at the beginning of this year, and everybody moved on to Miami and the Jets, obviously with Aaron Rodgers. Mm-hmm. Where do you see, what do you hear? Where are most people, around you with the Bills right now?
It's kind of hard to tell. I did see that it seems like a lot of people are picking us for Sunday night, largely because Miami is so banged up. It's hard to say, everything's so week to week. I think sometimes people, for me, I don't care how the Bills win. It would be great if they were all by 30 points, and that Patriots divisional win a couple of years ago, that would be fantastic, or how the defense played and the game against the Cowboys. But I think because in 2020, especially, Josh was Super Josh, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I think you can fall into that trap with any team. You just expect that every week, and football's it's so ratcheted up because there's only 17 games. I don't know. People seem to be in love with the Ravens and the 49ers for the most part, because they've been so good and so dominant, especially the Ravens. But I think, Joe Fortenbaugh, who's married to a Buffalo girl, his wife's from East Aurora, he had the Bills in his Final Four yesterday when I was at work. So that made, and he's a big Eagles fan. So that was kind of cool to hear that.
Nice. Presuming Buffalo at Baltimore AFC Championship game, then.
Yes.
Right, sure.
So, Don and I were talking before you came on. Don told his famous story about 1995. 20 years later, when he was going through some old personnel files, he found that Gardner had actually boarded the Miami team bus after the famous 1995 Double Bird Brian Cox fight game. And Don was so what do you remember, of Bills Dolphins? When did you leave Western New York? And what do you remember growing up and from the 80s, the 90s? Did you hate the Dolphins as much as everybody else did?
I did. I gotta say, Carwell's a big dude. So for them to see him on that, I know Brian Cox was not a small man either, but for him to go on that bus, I did see that. That made me chuckle. I remember, I was young. I'm 54, so I did not really experience that for the 70s, but I do remember in 80 when we beat the Dolphins for the first time. I remember the goalpost came down, and it was like we had won the Super Bowl. I don't know, you guys remember that? I still couldn't see that day.
It was when that happened. It was the season opener.
Yes,
they tore the goalpost down during the season opener, which is insane.
And I think Coach Knox said, we're going to need those next week, or next game or whatever he said. And then of course, we had a lot of bad years, but then the Marino Kelly, that rivalry was something that was. And I think because of that, even that the Dolphins rivalry has always been my biggest one as a fan, and it's always hit differently. I still, one of my memories is Jim, it was in Miami. I was early in the season. I can't remember, but he it was I think it was one of those back and forth games, and he took it in himself for the go-ahead touchdown with
that was the season opener in 1989, and it was in Miami. Good recollection. It was third and goal from the 2 last play of the game.
And it was hot too. I think it was hot, and
a couple touchdowns in the fourth quarter.
Were you at that game?
No, I wasn't. I watched it at home.
Wow. So Christine, when you think, I asked Don this question, when you think Bills Dolphins, do you have a Dolphin player that really irked you? What I think, my memory is Carwell Gardner, Brian Cox. Don's is Don Shula, Marv Levy.
I should add that. Remember Jim Jensen?
Yes.
He's the third string quarterback, but he was maybe kind of like a Taysom Hill kind of guy, but he would be like a Wayne Corbett, where he'd always, it was 3rd and 8 and you get 9 yards somehow.
he drove away, and he had one of those neck rolls.
Yeah, that's right.
And he wore number 11 out of the backfield. Yeah, right. And he was, frankly, he was kind of an odd looking running back. He was a tall, kind of lanky white guy.
He was a football player,
playing
just
running back. He drove me crazy.
Me too.
He was like Travis Kelce of today, where 9 yards on 3rd and 8.
Sure.
Oh my God, drove me nuts. What do you got, Christine? Who'd you hate?
I would think Brian Cox was a big one, right?
Sure.
I mean, I did not like Dan Marino because he was so good and so amazing and so talented. But I think Brian's got to be it for me. Just real quick, somehow somebody I follow on Twitter and follows me back, he knows Richmond Webb. So Richmond Webb follows me on Twitter, which is kind of a neat thing. And I follow him, and he's like such a nice person. But it's just funny that Dolphins hater would be like a follower and have someone, a former Dolphin follow me. So that's kind of neat.
Richmond Webb would get the better of Bruce Smith quite a bit.
He was a Pro Bowl left tackle. Yeah, they were mano on mano. I think Bruce he hated to admit that anyone ever got the better of him, but he would say, this guy gives me fits.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Wow. It's amazing to think about all the big games and all the big memories. Have you ever been to a Bills-Dolphins game, especially in Miami, Christine?
No, I want to say like most of my games that I've been to for some reason were always Bills-Jets. I'm not sure why that just must have been the game that we could go to like when I was in college or out of college.
Sure. So I was going to ask Don this when you popped on with us, and maybe you'd like to hear this as well. Don, was basically the point man for travel for 15 years for the Bills. What was it like planning the Miami trip every year? I traveled with the team as well, Christine, and I could tell you that the hotel that the Bills stayed at in Miami, back when I went, it was kind of like the Star Wars cantina. There was all different sorts of people there. It was every single like cartoon character type of person you'd ever imagine was absolutely in that hotel lobby. What do you got for us here, Don?
Yeah. No, there was obviously a huge Buffalo contingent down there. People that went for retired there or whatever, and the kids, and so it was a big deal when the team buses pulled up, but. That's Star Wars cantina. That's a good one. I just remember I was in a worry, and it didn't matter for me because I was in the front office, I was administration, but I was worried like, is this too nice here? Like our players, they're still focused on this game, right? Like this, suddenly you're in Jopton, and there's the beach and and like
especially if you're playing there now, right, Christine? Like it's the dead of winter here,
right?
And then you board a plane, and what was the flight down there? About 3.5 hours?
No, not even, because charter flight. It was surprisingly just a little less than 3. But I had a friend of mine that went to Pepperdine in California on a volleyball scholarship. After 1 year, he had to leave because it was too nice. He couldn't concentrate. I know myself too well. I know it's only you're there less than 24 hours, but guys just keep focused on the game. So, and most of the time, team played really well.
Would the guys have like how much free time would they have in Miami? A couple hours?
Not much. Yeah, you get there a couple hours before dinner. Dinner was and then an 11 o'clock curfew. So. Not a lot, but the problem is, if it was a Sunday night game, you have that whole next day.
So I was just going to ask you that, like that Sunday, Sunday is going to be a long day for those guys, right?
Oh yeah, because
you get there Saturday afternoon, you fly in, you have your meetings Saturday night, but then you've got all day Sunday. What would you do typically during a road night game during the day?
Well, it depends what it was, but if it was Miami, I'd go for a walk. Just shorts and a t-shirt and go for a walk, and just because you could, depending on the time of year. In September it was miserable, but for fans it's a long day too, and this weekend's going to be interesting. I guess the Saturday game is Pittsburgh play Saturday. Yeah, so
Christine, talk us through your schedule this weekend. There's obviously the Ravens-Steelers game, which is of interest to Bills fans at 4:30 on Saturday. Are you going to be done with work by then?
Yeah, I'm working early, so I'll get in about 6. I'm on the air from 7 to 12:30, so I got all day to not all day, but I have a few hours to get ready and root for the Ravens.
Right? Do you you do the? Could you maybe tell people who aren't familiar with what you do at ESPN Radio what you do?
Sure. I'm an anchor at ESPN Radio, and I anchor top and bottom of every hour. I'm usually on Monday through Friday, but I am filling in tomorrow morning. And then I also do I voice over like Sports Center brought to you by Toyota or Nissan or whoever. I do that on the TV side. And then I've been lucky enough to like voice features for our remote crew in radio. Like, so during a football game, you might hear, or a basketball game or anything, you might hear me like voice a feature. I one of my friends is a producer for Remote, so he's had me interview players for upcoming games. Like, this is funny. I interviewed Jalen Phillips earlier in the season, and I didn't say anything, but at the end I'm like, hey, Jalen, because he's seemed like a really good guy, does a lot for the community, like most guys do, right, throughout the league. And I said, by the way, I'm a Bills fan, and he just laughed. He was really funny about it. And then I just said, go Bills, but he laughed. That was funny. But I get to do like a lot of neat stuff, fun stuff.
Do you ever in your updates, because I remember you telling us last year that you personally write your updates for the most part. Yep. Do you ever slip in some Bills homerisms?
I don't think so. I really try hard not to. But I don't, because I got it. Like, the anchoring is so different, right? Yeah. Because it's supposed to be, like as unbiased as I can be.
Sure. Yeah, a couple things going back to Pittsburgh. We had Luke Russert on at one point. He said the most frustrating game, one of them, beside the obvious Super Bowl losses and stuff, was the Bills in 2004 just needing to beat the Steelers to get in the playoffs. Had like that unbelievable defense, but the Steelers rested their starters, rested Roethlisberger, and Willie Parton, third string running back, had like 200 yards. But this karma could work where Baltimore's going to rest Lamar Jackson, and Pittsburgh needs this game to get in. And maybe, obviously, it benefits the Bills, regardless of what they do in Miami. If Pittsburgh loses, maybe that happens, right?
That's funny you mentioned that, Don. I was going to actually ask you about that game. That comes up quite a bit on Twitter. I'm sure you probably remember it as well, Christine. It feels like that was like almost like the start of the drought, where I know it had been a couple of years since we had made the playoffs.
Yeah.
But it's like, man, all you have to do is beat the third string. What was the mood in the stadium, in the building after that loss?
Oh, it's devastating. And I think we were up for most of the game, and we had Ryan Lindell on the program, and he talks about him missing a kick at the end of that game, and I don't know, it was like the last play or whatever, but no, it was maddening because the defense was just one of those, star-studded, full of Pro Bowl players, and we had a great running back in McGahee, but to not, you could have pictured, Lee Evans talked about it too, like making not just getting in, but making a run.
Yeah.
It was just so frustrating.
Sure.
Horrible.
Christine, I wanted to ask you, there's this kind of like weird narrative going around about how the NFL scripts things, the NFL, has their hand on the scale, their finger on the scale. Like at ESPN, are the Bills viewed as like one of the marquee teams in the league? I know for the longest time they were completely irrelevant, and it was Sunday at 1:00 every week. Now this year, famously, they didn't play Sunday at 1:00 for like 10 weeks.
Yes.
What is the vibe around the company from your point of view of like how big of a deal the Bills and Josh Allen are nationally?
I think still a pretty big deal. I know that like people, I just from when I watch the shows and I listen and stuff, I think people wonder about the offense because it hasn't been, spectacular for a good part of the season. But Joe Brady, I think, has done a nice job coming in like mid-season and changing up things. And we're, I don't know if it's 4-1 or whatever it is with him. I think we should be 5-0 because we should have won that Eagles game because that was a fumble by, was it Devontae or AJ Brown? I can't remember.
AJ Brown.
That was a fumble late, and that was our ball.
Absolutely, it was.
But anyways, like I think that maybe just people like wonder about the offense and wonder. But I was like, you know what? If James Cook has to be like Thurman was all those years ago, God bless him, man. Like and people question about like Steph, like the guy's got over 1,000 yards, and like people scream about like the Josh interceptions, and I'm like, why would you want him to force it to Steph if Steph is double covered or it's just not there? Like, why not go to Gabe or why not go to Khalil or, Trent or any of those other guys, right? Like or Dawson or Dalton or whoever. I think that I like sometimes the national narratives frustrate me a little as a fan, just because I watch the games and I see, and I'm like, yeah, but your criticism of this and, if Josh does throw a pick and it forces it, like why would you want to do that? So that's just my perspective. I think people are waiting on the offense.
I hear you there. It feels like Josh Allen is held to a different standard than maybe some of the other quarterbacks in the league.
Yeah.
And, the NFL's favorite son, Patrick Mahomes, has not had a great year. And he forces the ball quite a bit as well. And they've been sloppy, a lot of turnovers, but he definitely gets more wiggle room. And clearly he's won 2 Super Bowls, so you're entitled to some of it. But, man, Josh, the national narrative around Josh Allen is really frustrating, at least in my eyes.
Yeah.
And I think, if I could just say one more thing, I remember it was before the Jacksonville game, and I was just looking up stuff. And Josh, at that moment, he was tied with Jalen and Pat for most interceptions. But you would think, and I told, and I don't love his interceptions, and he tries to make the best decisions. And sometimes the defense is just perfect, right? For a play. But he's not the only guy that throws a pick, right?
Right.
He's not the only guy that turns over the ball. And maybe I'm making excuses for him because I love the guy and we waited 20 years for our next Jim Kelly and we finally got him. But I just think I'm with you guys too. Sometimes the criticism is a bit much. I mean, he would never say it, but I just think as a fan for me, I was he's not the only guy that does this stuff.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of quarterbacks that don't throw interceptions a lot, they also don't make very many big plays.
Right.
You could have Trent Edwards again, who never threw a pick.
Yeah, even say Tyrod Taylor, guys like that.
Yeah, captain check down, right? Yeah. You don't ever take a risk.
I've got staying on the subject. The last time we had Christine on, I remember Josh, the two of you got into a little bit of the Sabres, but thinking about the Carwell, Gardner, Brian Cox, is there a Sabres equivalent to that you could recall of? A fight that was just memorable.
Yeah, Rob Ray and Ty Domi, right, Christine?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, Rob Ray and Ty Domi would go at it. That's like Carwell. And the added bonus of Rob Ray is that he had the tearaway jersey.
Yes.
So basically it would get ripped off of him and he'd be shirtless on the ice fighting. And that was kind of his advantage. And then you remember they changed the rule in the NHL.
Yes.
Christine, you had to have your jersey tied onto your pants because he'd have such an advantage not having his pads on. He'd be shirtless.
I've seen clips of that.
So Rob Ray, Ty Domi is probably the closest that we could get to Carwell and Brian Cox, right, Christine?
Yeah, and do you guys remember, and it had to be Philadelphia, because where else would this happen? The fan tumbled into our bench, and it was Rob, Brad May, and I think Matt Barnaby, pounding on the guy. Was it Philadelphia?
I think it was Ottawa.
Oh, it was Ottawa. Okay.
I think it was in Ottawa. And Don, they assaulted this guy. The guy fell over the glass into the bench. And now he's fair game if he's on your bench.
Yes.
And Rob Ray is just taking liberties with the dude, just pounding on him. Yeah, really. That was before the Malice at the Palace, the old NBA brawl. And it was more comical, I guess, than the NBA one. The NBA one was kind of scary. This was more kind of ridiculous. The guy fell over the glass, and you're right, Christine. Brad May and Rob Ray were just kind of beating on the guy, and it was. Is there anybody at ESPN? I picture it as all these experts in football just kind of walking down the halls. Is there anybody ever that you kind of pick their brain about the Bills? Hey, what's wrong with these guys? Whatever else. Do you talk football with a lot of people there?
I do. You know what? I've asked Harry Douglas, who I work with every day. He's on with Freddie Coleman, Freddie and Harry. I'll ask him some questions sometimes, and I'll ask, Herm Edwards, I'll sit down with him and say, what do you think about this? And he's funny because, after the Eagles loss, he came in, he goes, your boys are going to be fine. They're going to be fine, Christine. And then he comes in each week he's the nicest guy. And he always just says hello. And but I will sit with him. I've sat with him a couple times because I don't want to take too much of his time because they're busy going from show to show to show, radio and TV. But if I ask him, he's the one thing is his point was and everybody knows this and Josh knows this and Sean knows this, it can't be all on Josh because that's not sustainable. And that's an awful lot of pressure too.
Yeah, it should be noted, Herm Edwards made one of the most famous plays in NFL history.
Yes.
The Miracle of the Meadowland?
Yes.
And he has one of the most famous quotes of all time. He played to win the game. So not only does he have one of the most famous plays, he has one of the most famous ones. That's just kind of an amazing, and I'm sure you don't take that for granted, Christine, but what an amazing anecdote. You're oh yeah, I could just talk to Herm Edwards and Douglas.
Casually.
And maybe Dan Orlovsky's just chilling out and I can ask him to break down a film play or two. I find Dan Orlovsky just mesmerizing to watch, and I've learned we here at Cover One, Don and I don't do this as much as a lot of the other guys put in so much time and study and film work, and Greg Tomset and Eric Turner, they do a great job of breaking down Bills film. I know that Dan Orlovsky does that for all 32 teams, and I find him amazing.
He's incredible. Like if you watch NFL Live, like I'm always fascinated, especially on Mondays, like to watch him break. We have so many people there who I feel make me better at my job because I can watch and like pick up different things, like, you know, whether it's him or Heather Dinich or like all our other, you know, analysts and stuff. But Dan is amazing. Can I tell you one more quick analyst story?
Of course.
Please.
Yeah.
It was before the draft in 2018. And like, I heard that we were going to draft a Josh and I wasn't sure which one. And, so I said, I saw Lou Riddick and I said, hey, Lou, what do you think? Maybe we had drafted Josh at this point, I think maybe. And I was like, what do you think? Did we get the right guy? Because we've been waiting for a while. And he said, you know, Sean and Brandon are going to have a plan and he's going to be fine. And you have your quarterback. And I just like, and he was right. Right. Wow. Like they had a plan and we got our guy. We brought in Steph and drafted, different guys to come in. So that's my other cool story. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
Yeah.
I love this. Like, this is so you're walking around the halls of this place and you just have this like wealth of football information.
Lou Riddick.
Yeah, Lou Riddick. Yeah, just Mr. Lou. Do you take this then back home like to your husband and kind of show off and brag like during a football game? Like I think you need to do that, Christine. You need to get like some real technical analysis about something and then just bust it out like randomly during a game.
I'm so nervous. Like all I'm like is I'm standing during the last like 8 minutes of a game and I'm like, this is a big third down. And I've been saying that all game. Like that's all I got. Like I did when Rob and I first started dating, we were watching a hockey game and I'm like, drag your foot, Matthew, so you wouldn't be offsides, Matt Barnaby. And he's like, what did you just say? Because my husband played hockey his whole life. And that's when I think he knew he wanted to marry me because I said, drag your foot, Matthew.
That's you know what? I can share a funny story kind of on that regard. So I've been dating my now wife of over a decade for, I'd say maybe a month or two, Christine. And we were on a date, probably our fourth or fifth date. And the Aretha Franklin Respect song came on. Okay. And, you know, RESPECT, and I always would do Jim Kelly pass to Andre Reed.
Amen.
Amen. She did it too. I had no idea she was going to do it too. And at that moment, I knew this is honest to God truth. I knew I'm like, I'm going to marry this girl.
That's
She's
awesome.
The only other person I ever knew that would do RESPECT Jim Kelly pass to Andre Reed. I'm like, oh man, I'm like, this is it. Like
it's
I can't.
Like the Disney cartoon Lady and the Tramp, the famous scene where they're eating spaghetti.
Yes,
and they realize they're eating the same spaghetti.
Yeah, that was our same spaghetti noodle for sure. Before we let you go here, I was asked to ask you what you're baking for this weekend. Do you have a big game go to?
Well, let's see. I like to do different stuff. Today, because I'm going into work tomorrow. Today, I'm going to bake like whoopie pies, but with black cocoa powder. So they'll be like, black cocoa tastes like Oreos. That's what they use in Oreos. So they'll be like big, soft Oreos. But then I can't bake a victory treat until the victory is in hand. So there won't be anything on Sunday.
Do you bake for your coworkers?
I do.
Oh, how many people do you bake for?
Well, it just like, I try to bring in enough, like, because there's people there like through the whole day. Like if I get in there in the morning and like, I like the people at night to have stuff too. So I try to bake like a decent amount of stuff. Like, I don't know, like maybe at least 24 cookies.
Nice. All right. Well, that's really kind of you. Wow, that's really nice. Any Sabres thoughts? We're catching you after a nice performance last night, but boy, this team is maddening. They haven't won 2 in a row all year.
It is frustrating, and I joked. One of my coworkers, he gave me one of his aunts had passed away, and she loved the Sabres and Bills, even living on Long Island, and she had a Ryan Miller jersey that she had never worn. So he gave it to me. So I told my husband, I'm like, I'm changing up the karma. And I took down, and I love Michael Pekka, but I took down my Michael Pekka Go Head that I had hanging in the workout room, and I put the Ryan one, and we won. So I think that was it. And so we're going to be okay now. I changed up the sports karma.
Do you try to catch every Sabres game? Do you have like the NHL center ice?
We do. We have center ice, and like my husband's a Rangers fan. So we watch them for the most part. Cause like you said, the Sabres have been so maddening, like, you know, like the win against the Rangers this year was so good, and an earlier win against, like, I don't know if it was Boston. Yeah, like just Vegas. And I'm like, what is happening? And then these people start screaming like, God, fire Granato. And I'm like, how many coaches do you want us to go through? Like those guys, and I love the Sabres. And I love all those guys, but like maybe it's on them. Like those guys are making good money. Our core's making good money. I love Devin Levi. I love that kid.
Last night, so he's from Montreal, Don, and it was his first game back in Montreal last night, and he stood on his head. He was fantastic, and his mom and his dad were there, and I think his brother, who looks just like him, were in the crowd, and they kept showing him during the game. Christina, it almost feels like the Sabres are in that like drought era Bills thing where this season, it's not only just about the season, but it's about the last 10 frustration level, you know, and I'm sure you felt that, Don, like if you guys were like 4-4 in one season, it had nothing to do with the 10 seasons before, but the pressure was all ratcheted up because you hadn't made the playoffs in 15 years or whatever.
Well, for the people that had been there, we talked to Lee Evans, like he got all frustrated, like talking about those years 4, 5, 6. Like we all thought, it said everyone in the locker room, we all thought we were going to go to the playoffs. We should have gone to the playoffs, but you know, he didn't care about what happened before he got there. But if they're the Sabres, it does feel like that for me, even being a casual fan. Like this was supposed to be the year to break out of it finally.
They share the longest drought in professional sports with the Jets, right, Christine?
I think if we don't make the playoffs this year, it'll tie it, right? I think because I think the Jets have currently the longest.
Right. Well,
if I'm not mistaken,
Aaron Rodgers is going to do his best to keep the Jets on that list for the next 3 years because I feel like he might be sinking their franchise for more than just the short term with becoming the de facto GM going forward. Any final thoughts for us? Maybe tell people where you're going to watch the game this Saturday and what your prediction is.
Well, I'm going to watch it here with Rob and the dog because that's what we always do. I never want to go out or watch with other people. I need to be focused on the game. And I feel good about our guys. I think because we have been able to kind of losing Matt Milano and I know Daquan's back now, but Daquan Jones for a good part and losing Trey White and Dawson was out for a couple weeks after hand surgery. I think we've been able to kind of weather the storm. And I love what Joe Brady's done with the offense. I feel good. I would feel so much better if the Steelers could lose or the Jags lose, or I know the Colts Texans tie is there's no way that's happening. Right. But, I would feel better knowing that we had wrapped up a spot before. And then I try not to do this. I'm like, man, if we could have just won that Broncos game, or if we could have done that. My husband's like, you can't do that. He goes, because those are in the past. He goes, all they can do is what's here.
Yeah, Miami can say the same thing. They blew a game against Tennessee that.
Yes, they should have absolutely won that. Yeah, right, absolutely. Who does your husband root for?
He's funny because he grew up a Cowboys fan because they were good when we were little, right? There's so many Steelers, Cowboys, Raiders fans because they were good. But he, I think around, I don't know, 2000s, he's more of a hockey baseball guy. So he's great about rooting for the Bills. And the funniest thing is he'll be like, hey, I saw somebody in a Bills jersey and I yelled, go Bills. And he's it's so funny that he's not taken over, but he also does that. It's hilarious. He's like, I saw a Bills license plate, or I saw this person, I talked to them and I told them about you. And it was he's funny that way.
He's been conditioned, right?
He's married into the mafia.
That's right. Would you ever, let's say the Bills go on a run, Christine, and obviously you have, where you work, sometimes there'll probably be special privileges and status. Would you ever consider going to an AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl, or do you need to be one of those people who watch it in the bunker?
I think I need to be in my bunker. I'll go to the parade, but I think I need to be in the bunker.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. I know a couple people like that as well, that they would turn down free Super Bowl tickets because they just can't be. And I mean, Don, you've watched the biggest games of your life in the stadiums. Yeah. It's tough, right? It's tough to not be able to just express yourself and drop an F-bomb.
It's brutal. It's brutal. I mean, you just the emotions that are going through that you have to keep bottled up. I think when I watch Major League Baseball general managers sit in the stands.
Yes.
I always wonder how in the world do they do that? Granted, there are 162 games, but a playoff game.
Sure.
And how do they subject themselves to be,
Well, you told me the story, Christine, before you leave. Don would tell the story about how he would watch the games with Marv Levy when Marv was the GM. And you're in the box with the GM of the team and some of the vice presidents. And boy, you don't want to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, but man, you're human and it's an emotional game, and your salary and your bonus is riding on it just as much as
we
theirs.
all want the same thing, but you still have to remember you're on the clock.
You're on the clock. Oh, that's fair to say. Thank you so much for joining us here, Christine.
Yeah, by the way, your center ice should be tax deductible, I would think, right? You probably already know that.
Is it? Like, I've never written it on. It's only $70 now, though.
Hey, times are tough. So yeah, you keep that when you file your taxes, that's tax deductible.
See, this is the part of. Thank God I'm on this show, because otherwise this would be like accounting hour with Don Purdy.
Oh, do you know what? Do you know what killed me? This is the first year we didn't have, because the 3 previous years we had the ticket, the Sunday ticket for free, and I'm like. And it's what is it, $400 or whatever it was, and I was like, well, I don't think we'll get it, because that's a lot of money, and I was dying without it though. Rob, my husband, who's not a huge football fan, he's like, oh, can we please get the ticket next year? And I think we're gonna have to, because like I was, but I love listening to Chris Brown and Eric Wood and Sal. Like, they're an awesome listen to. It takes me back to when I was younger and we didn't sell out and we had to listen to Van Miller every week. So
yes,
the guys on the radio did a good job for me, but I missed the ticket.
That's awesome. Well, Christine, if the Bills make a run, and they get to the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl, please consider maybe coming back on. We could talk one more time before the season ends.
Great for us.
I'd love that. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, you have a good rest of the day, and go Bills.
All right,
go Bills.
Go Bills.
All right. We're going to probably just leave it here. I guess, Don.
How cool was that?
Yeah, that was great.
Thanks for making that connection.
Sure,
again.
She's great, and it's just funny how casually, and I was just actually thinking when she was talking about all the people that she kind of just runs into, at work every single day. Yeah, we kind of had that too, right?
We did,
and I personally never took it for granted when I walked in the locker room and there was Thurman Thomas. Or there was, there was Andre Reed, or the life-changing experience when I saw Bruce Smith in the locker room for the first time. But you said John Madden was there, or Dick Butkus, and it's just like, it's kind of crazy when that's your work environment, right?
It is, yeah. It's very different, but it kind of isn't as different as you think when you're in it. Sometimes it's just you feel that way, retrospectively, or when someone brings it up.
Right. And, any more travel memories of being in Miami?
Just that Bills fans are, disproportionately present there. A lot of blue in the parking lot, and expect there to be,
They said it's going to be 50-50 at worst. Bills fans
50-50.
Vivid Seats does based on where people are buying the tickets from, their zip codes.
Well, I think that might underrepresented because of so many. A lot of people that just live there. Sure. They used to live here. You can't tell where they're from, but
Jody is going to the game.
Is she?
I'm dropping her off at the airport at 4:00 today.
Excellent.
She and her friend are going down to Miami. I meant the Star Wars Cantina reference. Those hotel lobbies were can't really describe to people like what it was like. Like, you get off the bus, you're wearing a suit and tie, you got a bag, and boy, everybody wants a piece of you, right?
They do.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah. They all want a piece of you. You got the
real experience.
You got the guys. Yeah. I was approached many times for an autograph.
Yep.
I mean, you have no idea who I am. I'm no one. I am.
They don't care.
But you have a suit on, and you've got a tie on, and you've got a bag.
Yep. And you're inside the ropes.
You're inside the ropes. So I was approached for autographs. I was approached for tickets. I was approached for other things, anything and everything. Right. So I'm looking forward to Sunday. I'm going to say that Tennessee beats Jacksonville.
Wow.
And I also, there's been a pretty lively debate on Twitter, and maybe you can chime in on this before we go. The Baltimore backups, everybody's like, oh, well, they're not going to play anybody. Those dudes have every incentive in the world to play.
Really?
Right?
Yeah, playing for the jobs.
Do you remember like a obscure guy or a backup guy in a game that quote unquote didn't mean anything for the Bills, who their incentives are tied to this? They're next year's contract, putting it on film for another team. Like I always find it interesting that people think that these games don't mean anything to the teams that are out of it, but it means a lot to the players.
It sure does. Yeah, though. I mean, and the talent level isn't always very much. I mean, you could argue Lamar Jackson is MVP kind of, but I mean, they almost won last year with their backup.
Yeah, and Tyler Huntley's going to play Saturday, and he's an unrestricted free agent after this year.
Oh, yes, he's got every reason. How about Rob Johnson?
I put that online. I said he needs to. Rob Johnson had one game. Yep. Right in 97,
he tore it up for Jacksonville enough to get him to be the John Butler.
Yes,
one of the most respected football minds in the entire NFL, to say he's going to be our guy.
5 years, $25 million contract.
Yeah.
Off of one game.
One game. Yeah.
And so that's where I think people maybe missed the mark. Of course, Tyler Huntley's not Lamar Jackson, and a few of the Ravens starters are not going to play at all. But the guys who are playing are absolutely motivated to play.
Yeah, when you only have, I mean, what is it, 45 guys active? I mean, you have to play some of your starters, but then I think it might, coaching is where, Harbaugh might think, all right, if we're however the game's going, I might pull my starting left guard and put in a backup lineman, but still, again, the talent level isn't that much.
And the backup lineman is extra motivated to play.
Cincinnati last year, they were down 3 offensive linemen, right, when they came in here,
right,
and he wouldn't have known it.
Cincinnati famously put the Bills in the playoffs in 2017 with quote unquote nothing to play for, because those guys.
That might be the best example.
I know that game brings PTSD to you, and the end of the drought after
too soon. I'll admit it. No, not you saying that. The way it happened was like too
but just a reminder for Bills fans that these guys are they want to play, and especially the guys who haven't played all year. This is it. This is their shot. So thanks everybody for tuning in, listening. Please like and subscribe if you already have not to our show, and hopefully the Bills win Sunday. We'll be back next week with some playoff content, and depending on who we're playing, see who we might be able to get to join us.
I see it happening.
All right, thank you.
Go Bills.